and welcome to episode number 6 of Office Hours. Today I'm joined by my special guest, this glass of whiskey, and you. Satisfying. So what is Office Hours? If this is your very first visit to my office, welcome. Welcome so very much. Office Hours is a show in which I take approximately an hour and I answer 3 of your questions about game mastering, dungeon mastering, role-playing game type stuff in general. We stick to fairly specific questions. A lot of these questions come to me through a particular game or about a particular situation in a game. They're coming from people who are brand new to GMing, looking to get into GMing, or people who just want to polish up on their GM skills and drain my brain of the experiences that I've had. Now, as with everything in Office Hours, if you want to get involved, if you have a question, you have feedback about the show, you can get involved by going to www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. There's a big old Office Hours link on my main homepage there, and you can fill out the form and submit your questions. Now, I've got lots of questions, so if it's a few weeks before we get to you, I apologize and I thank you for your patience. I've learned a lot about GMing in the last couple of years, given that I've been doing so much of it. But I've got a GMing history that goes back to the mid-90s, which for me, based on how old I am, is quite a long time. You might also have a long history of GMing, but you might not. You might just be trying to get into it. So either way, whatever your experience, whatever games you play, whatever reason you're here, welcome. Thank you. I'm glad to have you. So today we've got 3 good questions. Well, we've got 3 good questions and somebody who's a big cheater and jammed a little extra question at the end, but I'm going to be nice and we'll answer that question. Let's get started, shall we? No time like the present.
I'm playing Shadowrun 5e with my group, and I'm having some serious issues keeping track of, all the bonuses and such. How exactly am I supposed to keep track of a full team of enemy runners, as well as their character bonuses, as well as the world around them and the environment? It becomes incredibly overwhelming. I realize that that's part of Shadowrun, but I imagine there's some sort of trick to it, because, people GM the game. Also, is there a way besides talking to your players to encourage inter-character interaction a little more? I'd like to help my players feel more comfortable doing it.
So, Eyes, first of all, you big cheater. That's 2 questions, but you know what? That's okay. We'll talk about that. So, second of all, yeah, this is a problem for games first, and then GMs as people who have to play games. I want to chastise, first of all. I want to put some heavy chastisement down on any game that does this to GMs without offering any kind of rules for it, right? It's cruel and it's unusual, and I feel like it's a form of punishment to expect us not only to manage all the overarching campaign stuff, like what megacorps are doing what, and which agents are where, and which characters are in love with whom, but also do that while simultaneously attempting to play several dozen fully fleshed out characters. It's awful. It's terrible. It's a terrible position to be in, and I feel for you, Eyes. I feel for you. It's rough. So game designers, if you're watching this, if you are a fledgling game designer, or if you are doing this to your players, stop. If your game contains complex characters that take forever to build, but might just die off the first time that we see them on stage, for the love of God, create a rule, create a set of rules. Do something to help GMs manage these NPCs en masse, or as clusters, or something. Help us boil the characters down, even if it's just part of your GM advice section. However, on the flip side, if we flip that over, there are lots of games that do this for us already. So let's give them a little round of applause, right? Hats off to you, Feng Shui, for being the first game that I ever saw to contain Mook rules. Right? That's my gold standard, and that set the bar for everyone else. A way of looking at a game cinematically and saying, look, in the fiction we're trying to represent, it doesn't matter if you're fighting 1 ninja or a dozen ninjas. Just be rid of those rules. So Games like that, games like Exalted, games like the Fantasy Flight Star Wars, these games recognize the nature of the game, and they've taught us that killing off several pointless ninjas is sometimes done in one roll. And these pointless ninjas, or stormtroopers, or Ewoks, or whatever, they only have one hit point, and that we can make it fun to fight them, or to engage with them mechanically, without having to fight each one individually. Here's to Apocalypse World, right? Here's to Apocalypse World for giving NPCs half as many hit points as player characters and saying, you know what? A single shotgun blast is enough to put Balls right in his place, in the grave, with pants. The D6 Star Wars does that as well. It gives you a limited view of the NPCs you're trying to, let's be real, mostly murder, right? Now, some games go halfway. Some games do this by saying, don't create the entire NPC, right? Just create the things that you need to know about. This is probably the best advice that you can take, even if it's not officially part of the game. You can hack it, and let's talk about that. This is how I do it, right? So generally, if I've got advance warning that an NPC is going to come on screen at some point, I get to decide in advance. So this is like, next session, I'd really like to go and visit the old Viking that lives in the cave, up past Bloodmire Swamp. I want to go visit him. So I have a chance to think between sessions. Okay, all right. How much do I care about the old Viking that lives in the cave, right? If I care a lot about that character, I might put some work into them if I think they might be around a while. If I already know that they're important, right? If we've been leading up to them, I might come up with those that character and some of the information about what they would be like and the stats that I need. But honestly, I get to decide how much of a fuck I give about these characters. And if it's only a single fuck, if I have but one fuck to give, they're gonna get about 4 minutes of work, right? I'm gonna pick a couple of relevant skills. They got Viking wise, they got strange prophecies wise, they've got just the kind of shit that this Viking is going to be able to give to the characters. I don't have to worry about it, right? I fill in the details I need just for the one scene. I call it quits. I move on to something else. I start thinking about the journey through Bloodmire Swamp. So don't yes, you have a team of runners, and we'll talk about Shadowrun a little bit more specifically in a second. But the point is here, you got to look at how the character is going to fit into your ongoing game and only define them by those things. For a character you anticipate combat, depending on the game, you're going to need things like how easy it is for them to hit the enemy, which is to say the PCs in this case, their damage roll, their hit points, their armor class. You don't really need anything more than that. For social characters, things like their willpower stat, a couple of ways that they get things done. Maybe they are deceivers, maybe they're persuaders, maybe they're manipulators. Give them skills to do those things, but you don't need to fully flesh them out. I don't care where this Viking grew up. I don't care about anything other than what we see on screen. He's the tip of what might later be a bigger iceberg. And what I'll do here is create, I have sort of a maximum, I have a 3-part maximum for NPCs, right? The minimum amount of things that I want to know about an NPC, the absolute baseline, and this can inform mechanics, it can inform play. This is the maximum that I use, right? Okay, what do they want? What does this NPC want? How do they get what they want? So what tools do they have? And what are the mechanisms for those things? That's all you need to know, right? And this goes from the lowest ninja all the way up to the biggest, most important adversary, which we'll get into adversaries in a bit. But the point here is, if you know what the character wants, you know the tools they use to get those things they want, and you know the mechanisms for those tools, you're good. That's all you need for an NPC. If by some miracle of whatever gods you worship, if by some miracle the NPCs get to live past that first encounter, keep the sheet open, right? Don't limit them to just the things you've created. Give them space to grow, right? This way you can open up the sheet between sessions and start to fill in more details, or you can wait until the next time we see them on screen to fill in those details as you need them. Now, system mastery will help you with this. The more you know about the game, the easier this part becomes. Improvising mechanically, you also have to be willing to throw balance not entirely out the window, but certainly against the window. You want to put it on the ledge, because what you might need to do is improvise stats about the characters within the bounds of what the players expect. Now, if you're playing a game like Pathfinder, like tough shit, game balance is going to come down on your head for this. You have to balance your NPCs. That's a choice that you've made by choosing that game. For me, when I'm playing Burning Wheel or Dungeon World, I'm familiar enough with those games to know exactly how much push I want to put on any given mechanic, right? If random Revolutionary Guard has a B3 in swords, because I know they're going to fight, suddenly I need to know if they have a deception skill. So I'm going to guess based on fictional positioning, right? Our favorite kind of positioning. I'm going to guess based on fictional positioning. So does the Revolutionary Guard have a history for lying? Have we seen this character lie before? Do we know about their general relationship with the truth? Are they predisposed to it? Not at all. As a group that they come from, is lying an important skill they would have learned? And I'll give them a skill based on that and just kind of go with it, right? NPCs don't have to be fully fleshed out, and you don't need to justify to anyone except the game why a character has a certain stat. And this is why more complex games or more nominally balance-minded games care more about this, and why you as a GM might be a little afraid to randomly throw stats in, because then you have players, especially if your players care a lot about mechanics, they're going to be like, well, how is it possible? He's only 4th level. How does he have a +6 in this skill? Because if he's a cleric, he could never possibly have a +6 because it's not a class skill. And it's like, okay, all right, if that's the game you're playing, you're probably already good enough at the mechanics to know what the maximum skill for any given class is. But keep in mind that the more mechanical those games are, the harder your job as a GM to improvise within balance. So keep that in mind. For me, though, what I would do is only prep what you feel like, what's mechanically effective to you at the table, whatever gives you an easier job to play, and whatever helps you maintain the flow of the game. Right? Make that call yourself. So as for actual physical stuff you can do, I play all of my games on Roll20 right now, so having a dozen half-filled character sheets lying around isn't really a big hassle. If you're playing AFK, though, you can condense a lot of this information down onto an index card. If you are currently living in a country in which index cards are not a thing, an index card is it's like a little piece of semi-cardboard paper, usually blank on one side. You flip it over, it's got lines on it. A lot of indie role-playing games use them for stuff. There are places in the world that don't use index cards, so it's worth mentioning. Index or Post-its or half-page papers or whatever, they're your best friends. You put all your narrative crap on one side and all your mechanical crap on the other side, you got an instant NPC ready to go. You don't even have to name this NPC, you can do it in advance. You can make cards for random denizens of Seattle, and the next time you need a character that might be hanging out in the Chatsubo drinking a Neo Manhattan, you just yank one out of your deck and bam, there you go, right? It allows you to say, I don't know, I'm disclaiming to randomness who this character is, and you can have a mix. You can have a pile of like, these are pre-gens, and these are incentivized future NPCs, and they can move from one to the other, right? You can pull an NPC, fill some details, and then throw them in. And you can organize these however you like. Look to the game to help you decide how to organize this stuff. As for your other question, as for your cheater question, how to get your players more comfortable with interacting with each other in character, doing inter-character role-playing. And God, I know this feeling. Like, what you really want as a GM sometimes is just like 5 seconds to like take a breath. You want to be able to like put aside your silly accent and like look over your notes and just like breathe. Just breathe for a minute. And the easiest way to do that without actually taking a break, because you could do that. You could be like, yo, I need a second. I need to go and smoke an imaginary cigarette and think about my life for a minute. But sometimes all you need is a breather, and the best way to get that is to turn the characters on each other. To be like, I don't know, make this plan in character. Talk about this stuff. So what you want to do, I find, that something that helps this is give the characters, give the PCs things to talk about without you being present, right? Put NPCs between them. This is particularly easy in a game about relationships or a game in which relationships are important. You can say, okay, well, character A, you're in love with NPC, number one, and character B, you are you hate this NPC. You hate NPC one. So the two of you talk about this. Something has happened recently with these NPCs. Why don't you have a scene where you talk about that? It'll give them an opportunity to discuss and debate and to play up their characters a little bit. It'll give them some space to have that conversation. You can frame it up, and then while they're talking, you can flip through your notes and prepare for the next thing. On a social level, you want to kind of lead by example. You know, be the GM you want to see in the world, right? So you want to give players a lead in, right? If you want accents in your game, you should do them. If you want social content in your game, do it. Have conversations as an NPC. Like help put the players into that mind space, and then create a safe place for them to get into it. And by that I mean discourage teasing. Don't make fun of people if they do a stupid accent that isn't accurate. Like, it's really nerve-wracking if you're playing with a bunch of people that either you don't know or you haven't taken a big risk with before. It's hard to try out a new character voice or like do a cool idea because, you know, it's a gamble. We're all taking a gamble together. So when you have a room full of nervous nerds, sometimes you want to either be the person that takes that plunge or reward the people that do, right? And this doesn't have to be a game reward, though it certainly can be. But socially, as a reward, you can say like, hey, that was really cool. You did a great job role-playing today. Now, if you play a game that concretely rewards role-playing, the game will help you with that job. The game will say, players who embody their characters, players who follow their belief, their instinct, or their goal, they're going to be rewarded for this. Their character will get better by their role-playing. And you can import a lot of those systems and graft them into other games. For example, the belief, instinct, and goal system from Mouseguard, pretty easy to graft onto Shadowrun. I have some experience with this. If you haven't seen it, go check out Mirror Shades, because that's exactly what I do. So, yeah, let the game help incentivize and just, like, let people make a mistake, right? Let people try something silly, and that's okay, right? Positive reinforcement. It's a big deal. This is part of our job as GMs. Encourage the kind of play we want at our table. Cool. My suggestion for the NPC thing, too, as far as Shadowrun goes, Shadowrun makes you stat out a lot of things that might not be important. Make a list. Make a list of things you actually care about and just focus on those for now. A thing to think about. All right, so our second question, a little more concise, but something that I'm so excited about. This one hits right to the fundamental core of what I love about GMing.
Hey Adam, my name's Andrew, aka Great Googly Moogly. I'm a relatively new GM of around a year and a half, and one aspect of campaigns that I still struggle with is getting the players emotionally invested in the big bad of the campaign. How would you recommend someone goes about making a villain that the players really want to go up against?
Well, the great googly moogly. Gosh, you know, man, bad guys, right? Bad guys. Our big bad evil guy. It's a trope. It's a D&D trope. The BBEG. The Darth Vader. Hitler. Gozer the Gozerian, right? So, it's a bit of a trap. The idea of the BBEG is a bit of a trap because we're so brainwashed by what D&D or I guess role-playing in general is supposed to be like, as reinforced by heroic media. So my thoughts here are think about them as antagonists, right? I talk about antagonists more than I talk about bad guys or villains or evil dudes, because it implies a certain morality that takes you into a supervillain path and is not necessarily what we're kind of thinking about here. So we're going to talk about antagonists instead. A campaign with antagonism, especially personified antagonism, is great, right? Antagonists are someone you can struggle with. You can say, oh, everything would be great if it weren't for that damn wizard. Or, yeah, there's a dragon attacking the village, and the village would be fine if we just killed that dragon. It's someone to beat your head against, get to know, and in the end, slaughter wickedly or spare mercifully, right? They're satisfying not because they are big bad end guy. They're satisfying because they're like us. They have power. They have agency, they have desire for things, and they're heavy and meaningful because the game mechanics make them that way. They have the ability to seriously mess with our plans. They're important to the narrative. But adding them to RPGs can be tricky because we can go one of two ways with them, right? Sometimes GMs, and I struggle so hard with this even still, and I think most GMs do, no matter how much they say that they don't. Sometimes they end up like the GM's favorite, right? A GM who spends time and energy lovingly crafting an antagonist, gets to play out that antagonist's plans, working their way through what that antagonist is like, you can become attached to them, which can lead to horseshit smoke bomb escapes. And no, you can't kill them. I don't know, the teleporter, and they magically, they're gone. No, your magic missile, it just bounces off. Yep, no, he's got laser something. Yep, you can't take my bad guy away from me. No, that's my guy. So I guess this is advice. This is advice number one. Player characters will destroy everything you love. They will. They will just. Here's to all the dead NPCs. Here's to you, supervillains. They'll take away everything you love. That's their job. Come to appreciate that for what it is. Let your NPCs burn brightly and terribly and then be driven into the ground or 6 feet below it, because that's what happens. Look at them in crosshairs, right? Recognize that anything you make, the PCs will destroy. And that's fun. I'm gonna give you some advice. We're gonna talk about so a wise man named Tor once passed on to me some very cool advice about antagonism in games. And Tor, I'm sorry if I butchered the way that you described this to me, 2 years ago, but the general consensus, the idea of it has stuck with me, and I wanna pass it along. So what I try to do is create antagonists who have admirable goals and pursue them with abhorrent means, or antagonists that have abhorrent goals but pursue them in an admirable way. So, for example, all right, we'll give you a fantasy example. So, all right, so imagine your antagonist. You've decided that your antagonist in the game is the Wizard King of Ballasfarn, and the Wizard King has this admirable goal of uniting all the 12 duchies under peaceful rule with cupcakes and justice for all. Right? Only his method for getting the 12 duchies together is to institute necromantic martial law, and he's raising the dead, and he's using this army of the dead to kill everybody who stands in his way. So, admirable goal, cupcakes. Abhorrent means skeleton fascism, right? So the players are in this position where they're like, yes, no, that's great. Like the 12 duchies have been at war for 1,000 years, and all the dukes need to rally together under a single beautiful banner. And hooray, the Wizard King is going to, oh God, use skeletons. So instead of just killing them or questing after the life of the Wizard King, what they need to do is figure out how they can change the Wizard King or support an alternate approach so they can get their cupcakes without also getting Skeletor fascism, right? Or if you flip it, right? Let's flip-flop it, and we'll say the Wizard King wants to rule over all the lands forever and ever as a divine overlord, high witch. That's what he wants. The Wizard King wants to rule over the land forever. That's not okay. Nobody voted for the Wizard King. That's a bad goal. You can't just take over. Only, it's kind of working, right? Every time he conquers a kingdom, the economy blooms, people become happy. The Wizard Overlord maybe is not such a bad idea, right? Tyrannical methods, decent end result. So if you create an antagonist that is more complicated than just let's go kill them, it makes it hard for the players to make simple black and white decisions. Black and white decisions make games boring. If there's an obvious choice, that's the only choice. you want to give the characters a reason to discuss, to debate, to struggle, right? Give them room to make those philosophical decisions in, and do it in a way that isn't just generic like I gave you. Tailor these things. Tailor them to your player characters in a very specific way. The best way to make an antagonist that the characters care about is because they oppose not just the world at large, but the PC's desires. They create tension by giving the PCs something that they want, but also things that maybe they struggle with, right? And do this, like put them at cross purposes, right? So if the paladin, let's say the paladin in your group wants to end all evil forever, and the wizard wants to bring their beloved back to life, right? Say their beloved wants to they died tragically. Make it so that the only person who can bring their beloved back to life is an evil sorcerer, right? Make that deal. Put the PCs in a position to fight over an NPC or to debate over an NPC. The other thing you can do, if you're this is the pro mode, don't make people antagonists on purpose, right? Don't intentionally create antagonists. Look at the PCs, look at what they want, look at the world, look at the people in the world and what they want, and let antagonism bubble up to the surface. Let the scum float to the top, because that will happen, right? Now, this is so much easier to do in games that focus on PC goals specifically and mechanically. Churning feel, I'm looking at you. But you can also use overarching campaign type goals, game goals. Think about the premise of your game. How does the antagonist stand in the way of that premise? Right? If your game is about hoisting the black flag and spitting in the eye of the Queen's Navy, pillaging the high seas, obviously your antagonist is going to come from like the Commodore and her men, but it's also going to come from other pirates. It's going to come from the local village leaders who want to protect themselves against your piracy. Don't think about it in terms of good guy, bad guy dialectics. Let it happen organically as the PCs make enemies, right? Because antagonists in role-playing games are often the heroes of another role-playing game from a different angle, right? I mean, how many of you at home right now, and I mean, seriously, if we could raise hands, how many of you are GMing a game or have recently GM'd a game in which the characters are the bad guys? This guy right here. I'm doing it right now, right? I mean, not right now, but you know what I mean. PCs are really good at being shitty antagonists, so think about it that way, right? Like, we've all been in that position, so, it's also why I play antagonistic characters, because I play the Cantors and the Grigoris of the world, because I want to create antagonism. It's a thing I want to be a part of. So don't think about villainy, think about antagonism. To the point, let's take a quick look at like Swan Song. So I'm actually really proud of some of the antagonism in Swan Song. So there are obvious villains. There are smoke screens that I use, right? Like in Swan Song, there's a terrible AI, an unleashed AI wandering around the sector, just destroying things. Like just obvious, clear, supervillain antagonist, right? Here to destroy and ruin things. But the Warmind is a smoke screen. In my mind, the real villain of Swan Song is Rajani Van Dorn, right? Rajani is an incredibly powerful criminal underworld boss who is corrupting and messing with the PCs in some pretty subtle ways. Like, to the point that the party has had to make the decision to work with her, even though we all know she's the real villain of the series right now. So putting your players in a position to make hard choices is what makes them care about the adversary. An adversary that you can just off and nothing will happen, it's not a choice. No one cares about that. So to make your players care about this, or help them care about it, you want to make these characters human, or human-esque, right? You know what I mean. Like, give them feelings, give them motivations, make them fallible, but make them competent. Give them friends and allies and enemies of their own, make them real in a situation of their own agency. They exist in the world without the PCs. So you can think about kind of how they would take place in the world. And then, when you've made them real, when you truly love them, get ready to lose them. Because, well, GMing is a tragic, tragic art. But it's fun, right? And that's the thing. If we lose a character, we have an infinite supply of additional characters. There's always another amazing NPC just waiting to get the spotlight. So don't be too scared. Follow Vincent's advice. Crosshairs. Right? It's not so bad if you lose somebody. At least an NPC in a game. So our last question comes from Liceham, which is your username is gross, Liceham, but that's okay. And it's about prep, but in a different way than we've talked about before. Let's see what Liceham wants to know about prep.
Hey Adam, my name's Michael, or Liceham in your chat. My question is, what tips do you have for low prep GMing? Some systems help a lot more than others with NPC lists and things like that, but what general tricks and tools do you find yourself using the most, both for prep and at the table? Thanks.
All right. So prep. Low prep GMing. Now, it's nice because, so I think that prep has become this thing, and I feel like, in my experience as a consumer of role-playing games, the first time I saw a game touted as a low prep RPG was probably the now seminal Fate game of, was it Shadow of the Century? Spirit of the Century. Spirit of the Century. Right. So Spirit of the Century was shown to us as a low prep game with a bunch of really good tools for prepping in play, right? And a lot of games since then have built those mechanisms into the games themselves. So I want to talk a little bit about prep generally and kind of why you would prep and what kinds of games help you and why you would want a low prep game. And we'll talk a little bit about that stuff generally, and then we'll talk about low prep and how you can remove the high prepness from some of the games you might already be playing. So, prep does exactly one thing. There is literally only one purpose for prep. You ready? The only reason we prep, the only reason we do any of this stuff is so that we as GMs confidently have an answer to, okay, now what happens? And then what? What happens when I do this? Right? So, prep, when the players look to us to say, well, what's the next thing? What happens? Our prep allows us to answer that. And sometimes games will insert mechanisms that alleviate the requirement of doing that prep in advance. It's an answer to the curiosity of the players. So there's basically two kinds of prep that you have to do prior to a game. A low prep game itself eschews one or both of these kinds of prep. Right? It tries to throw out one or the other or both of these. So there's narrative prep, right? This is the preparation of situations, settings, and scenarios, characters for the PCs to run into. This is your preparation of the dungeon map. This is your preparation of what monsters live in what room of the dungeon map. This is your preparation for how far from town is the dungeon map. This is the kind of prep that GMs feel they need to have done if they want to create a cohesive, controlled narrative. This is the what does she say when I tell her mom is dead kind of prep. This is the how far is it from Kerrigan's Crossing to Rudridge Farm prep. This is the kind of thing that a lot of GMs feel a pressure to do in huge amounts with massive binders of notes and maps and drawings and almanac charts of the stars and when is the harvest season at Rudridge Farm this year according to the tables that we're using, etc. So, there's a lot of push to do this prep. So much so that we've kind of Stockholm syndromed our way into seeing it as world building, and we put it on a pedestal. We put world building on a pedestal. We spend thousands of hours as collective GMs making things that ultimately 90% of them no player character is ever going to touch. They might just wander past Rudridge Farm, and then who cares how far it is from there to Kerrigan's Crossing, right? So some of this narrative prep becomes world building, becomes creating a universe And it can vary from a bunch of loose ideas that are sort of connected to some very fucking specific details. Campaign settings are a form of done-for-you in advanced narrative prep. World building is a popular topic, and people who are good at it tend to be kind of smug because it makes them feel like, I don't know, like semi-successful novelists. You'll never win a Hugo Award for your campaign setting, but I can see why this gets fetishized. It's a thing. It's built into a certain style of gaming. The other kind of prep, the other sort of prep that we end up doing is mechanical prep. And mechanical prep is learning rules, right? But it's about being prepared for the eventuality that all the stuff from your narrative prep might get mutilated, manipulated, blown up, engaged in combat or coitus or both, right? Like, it's your prep to answer not what kind of armor is he wearing, but what's his armor class. It's not, how do I kill somebody with this spaceship? It's how much damage does my sand thrower do against an unarmored human target? This kind of prep can come from just knowing the game, reading the book for the first time, like literally just picking up the rule book and reading it and putting things in your brain. That's a form of prep. You've prepped for that game. But more than that, it relies on that fluid underpinning of the mechanisms to interpret the design. This is the cerebral game designer part of being a GM, because you're gonna run into a situation in which you don't remember, or there was never written a rule for the situation that you've just found yourself in. So if you want to reduce the amount of prep you're doing for any given game, think about the two descriptions that I've just given, right? Think about narrative prep. Think about mechanical prep. Which one of those two things is scarier to you? When you feel that nervous butterflies feeling, when you feel that GMing terror of like, oh God, I haven't prepared. I'm not ready. And we have to play. Then everyone's going to look at me and they're going to ask me questions. Like, how many people fit in the church of Darksburg? And they're going to want to know how much the statue on top of the church weighs. And what am I going to do? I'm not ready. Or is it, oh God, I don't know all the rules for this game yet. How does experience work again? Oh Jesus, I have to be ready. What armor class? So think about those two, because one of the two of them is going to weigh a little heavier on your shoulders. And that's where you want to focus your prep. For me, I find that it starts with mechanical. I have the mechanical fear first, and that stuff fades away the longer I play the game, so that I can focus on any kind of narrative prep that I want. I can slap together, at this point, finally, I can slap together a first edition Shadowrun NPC like that. I can just, whatever, I can throw it together. I can put together a mechanically balanced Burning Wheel character without ever looking at the book, because I've practiced. That's prep that I've done, not just for that game, but for every game of Burning Wheel or Shadowrun or Dungeon World or whatever as I go. So do that, right? Like, do the thing that scares you. Narrative prep, don't prep outcomes, right? That's the mistake. Don't prep the answer to what if. Prep the what if. And we'll talk about this more in a second. So we talked a little bit about this in the last episode, in episode 5, about disclaiming responsibility for the narrative. So I'm going to skip over that. If you're curious about how you can turn over some narrative authority to your players, check out episode 5 for that. I also tend to talk generally about cultivating what we call I've called a rich inner world, so that you'll have a generalized set of imagery and ideas to draw on in a pinch. So we won't go too much into that. That's sort of an overarching theme of just being a better GM. But how about this? Instead of thinking about low prep or high prep, let's talk about where we can do less prep for our games. Because often early GMs respond to their anxiety with preparation, which creates more anxiety when you don't have time to do that preparation. Let's say you never played 5e before, and you've got it in your head that you're going to run 5th edition for your friends. And maybe a couple of them have played it before. Maybe you're nervous, you've never GM'd, or you've only GM'd a couple of other games, like some simple stuff. Maybe you GM'd a Powered by the Apocalypse game. You kind of got an idea of how you want to play. and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, we're going to play our first session next week. I have to read the whole rule book. I have to memorize the entire rule book. Okay. And I also have to spend 8 to 10 to 12 hours making a dungeon or memorizing the adventure. And what if I forget what a hobgoblin's special abilities are? And then everybody looks at me like it's my responsibility to know these things. And then what if they think I'm a bad GM? And then what if I'm not allowed to GM anymore? And what if they don't want to play with me? And so what we do to try to make ourselves feel better about anxiety about play is preparation, right? So think about why prep for you is a stressful activity. Think about how you can reduce that stress and not lean on your prep so much. Try to understand what it is that makes you feel scared of playing, right? And I mean, of course, think about if the game you're playing is supporting you, right? Like, if your game literally is 400 pages of grappling rules before you're allowed to be a good GM, if it's very mechanically focused, well, you kind of have to learn those rules, right? It's that kind of game. And you have to accept that it'll never be a low prep game. If low prep is what you're looking for, you may not have time in your life to play that particular game. So try something else. Throw out those grappling rules. Go try a different game. Because games fit with, like, just like color looks better on some people than others, some games work better for some GMing styles. And if prep terrifies you, find a game that doesn't require you to prep so hard, narratively or mechanically. Now, there are all kinds of tools that you can use to help you, handouts for rules, baby name websites for narrative stuff, random generators of every size, shape, and genre. But I think the best thing you can do is a combination of disclaiming responsibility and just practicing. Like, just practice. I tell people constantly, and this is like maybe my favorite advice for new GMs. I tell people, just talk to your players and tell them, I'm nervous about this. I don't care about these things in the rules, so I didn't really read them. Some of you know this better than me. I don't really know what I'm doing yet. I'm going to be a really good GM. I know it. I can feel it. And I think you believe it. But I'm not going to be one in the first session. And tough it out with me, right? And if these people are people that are your friends and worth playing with, they'll be okay with that, right? They'll grow into the game with you. So practice reduces prep. Prep as a result of fear can be reduced by just creating a safer place for you to be unprepared, right? So for me, something that I've found has evolved over time, especially in the last, my GMing in the last 10 years versus the 10 years before it is so different. Even since Apocalypse World came out, I've started to think about games in a different way. For me, GMing, the GM's job is no longer answering questions, right? The GM's job, in my mind, is about asking questions that are interesting, right? So it's about saying, I'm curious about this. I see you creating narrative. I see your characters. I see them being interesting and cool. And I'm wondering, what would happen if this, right? It used to be about, oh, wait, I know this. I've got notes on this. There's exactly 206 fathoms between Kerrigan's Crossing and Redridge Farm. And I've got an encounter table for the road between the two. And I know what happens when you get to Redridge Farm because on my notes, it says right here, when they visit Redridge Farm, do this thing. But now, having experienced the confidence of being a GM for so long, for me, GMing is about, well, what's on the road between here and there? Why would you want to make that trip? Why are you going to Redridge Farm? What are you leaving behind in Kerrigan's Crossing? The less your prep dictates the final result of the rule of the world, the more surprise you're going to get out of it, right? Now it can be fun once confidence sets in, once you're feeling like you're in a place where you don't need to rely on your prep. It can be really fun just to lay the groundwork and slowly reveal the truths of the world, but also to leave space for mysteries, right? And the most fun thing about being a GM is to come up with those mysteries. Why is it like this? Why is the world this way? Why are these things like that? Why do the players care about this? Disclaim the rules too. Now we talked about narrative disclaiming, right? About saying like, I don't care about Kerrigan's Crossing. You tell me, right? But you can disclaim the rules too, especially with big complex books. Let your players teach you the rules for grappling for once. I don't care about the difference between a scimitar and a falchion, right? Except that one does a d6 damage and one doesn't. So let your players care about things mechanically and narratively and let them teach you. And remember, expertise doesn't come all at once. Expertise develops in pieces because you care about things, you focus on them, and maybe someday you'll make an NPC who's a swordmaster and it matters, the difference between a scimitar and a falchion. You'll find that mechanical prep easier and easier to improvise as you have system mastery, as you develop a comfortable space in the world. And if we can take a step back from the question in general and talk about what I call tips and tricks of creating a low prep environment for you to play in, honestly, and this is going to sound like mushy hippie GM bullshit, the best thing you can do as far as this one tip made me a better GM is understand what I would call the aesthetic of your campaign, right? And it's a little art degree, but if you understand the world that you're trying to portray, if you think about its symbols and the palette that the world is painted in, it's going to give you an idea of the materials that you have at hand to craft that world, right? Is this a world of neon and chrome, cigarettes dying on painted lips? Is it about the roar of motorcycles in the dark? Is it about, the laughter of the damned in the gutters as the rich lord over the poor? Or is it an imperious world, right? Is it gold and marble? Is it parades? Is it military victory? Is it an age of decadence and pride? Once you've got a feeling for the tone of your world, everything else you do is going to either support or contrast with those things. Right? Let your inspiration color the bits and pieces that you add to the world. You're showing your players something from your heart, right? Something you care about. You're showing them something every time you describe a dark alley or a beautiful garden, right? You're pulling from a place that matters to you. This is what makes creating random tables worth doing, because what can be really fun as a GM is rolling randomly on that table and saying, okay, how does this character, how does this location, how does this anything, insert noun here, how does this fit into my world? So what you end up with is an understanding of what there is available to you, and then you're adapting everything else that comes into it. Rules of the game, your prep, random tables. This is the essence of what Vincent calls barf forth apocalyptica, right? There's always something to be barfing forth. It's about the vibe of your universe. And so I think the real answer for me to get you into a place where you feel comfortable letting go of your prep is an understanding of your artistic vision of the universe. And I don't mean this in a showrunner, script writer sort of way. I mean this in a painterly way. I mean this in a sculptorly way. The artistic vision of your universe contains the players and their chaos. And if it doesn't, you need to adjust that. But the combination of your artistic vision and your understanding of the mechanisms of the game as a thing to drive that vision forward and to drive conflict into the vision. The longer I play a game, the longer a campaign runs, the better my idea of that setting becomes. And you will too. Prep is a way to absorb fear and hide it away inside preparation. And you'll find that the more confident you get as a GM, the less afraid you're going to be of not knowing the answers to things. And that's when it's going to get real, right? When you're not afraid of your game anymore and you're not afraid of the unknown in your game, I think you'll see why GMing for me is such a beautiful act, why it's so much fun. So hopefully that's both helpful to you, Lysam specifically, but everyone at large, and hopefully it's like a tiny little bit inspiring. Like hopefully it means something. Maybe it tweaked something in you. I know that every time I do an episode of the show, at the end of it, I feel excited and looking forward to my next opportunity to GM. And I hope that you are too. So, as always, if you want to get involved, if you have questions for me, please go to my website, www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. Click on the office hours link and fill out that form. Send me your questions, and as long as you keep sending questions, I'll keep answering them. So thank you so much for coming, everybody. It's always a delight, and we will see you in the office next week for more office hours. Thanks for coming. Have a good game.